It's morning in Los Angeles, and we're here again to talk about the mental obsession repeatedly. And, I was with some friends last night, one of whom is a psychiatrist, and she had two psychiatrists in her circle commit suicide in the last 2 weeks. And I bring this up because within the confines and the context of both sobriety and sanity, this kind of activity is at an all-time high in the world. And the idea that there's no place to turn and nothing else to do but kill yourself is certainly a concept that is contrary to any survival instinct that's healthy and natural and wholesome and helpful. But certainly indicates a degree of desperation, I would say. And my experience is that compulsions are all based on obsessive thoughts. Every obsessive thought I have has an impulse or a reactive tendency attached to it because it's defensive. There's a defense mechanism. When I'm making believe that my thinking is reality, I have to defend that thought at all costs, or that thought disappears and dissipates because it literally has no place other than in my own thinking about my thinking. So if my thought has no place and I immediately think I don't belong, I have not only thought my thought was reality, I have now thought that I've become my thoughts. And now I'm in my thoughts. I'm not looking at my thoughts. I'm not observing my thoughts. I'm not seeing my thoughts with a degree of perspective. I'm actually thinking I am in my thoughts and I am stuck in my thoughts, and there is nothing else I can do, because the more I think about it, the more it confirms that more and more thinking is the product of more and more thinking. And this is not about not thinking. It's not about not thinking obsessive thoughts. It's not about doing what we're not doing. It's about starting to notice we're doing what we're doing, to be experiencing the things we're experiencing, and start to take, I say take responsibility as though we cannot take it. My experience is that we're all responsible, that there's an absolute nature that we all share. We are responsible for that nature by virtue of existing in the midst of that nature. And if we act irresponsibly, that's certainly a choice we have, but it doesn't become who we are. It becomes something we do. Just like thinking is something we do, it isn't something we are. So we talk very often about, I become, my word is my bond. It defines me. The things I think define me. The things I think define the words I think. They don't define me. If I am capable of creating words and defining them, then I am not those words that I create and define. And to think that I am is to think that the source of reality and truth is, in fact, this wobbly sensation I create and desperation in my own experience. And now I assign it to life and reality as being complicated and difficult, when in fact it's the thinking I'm doing that's complicating and making difficult the life I'm actually experiencing, that is not difficult and it is not complicated, because life has been doing what life does the whole time without arguing about it. It's just a present state of being, present state of nature. So that's what we talk about. Why? My sense is it doesn't get talked about very often. I can think about these things in my head and think, being alone, that it makes me alone because I'm thinking about things to my seeming self. But really what I'm thinking about are lonely thoughts, because they have no basis other than the thinking I'm doing about the thinking I'm doing, that gives me this sense that they're real because I keep thinking about them. And yet that sense comes with the sense of anxiety and stress and self-centered fear, we call it, as though the self I am is centered in the thinking I'm doing about the thinking I'm doing. Itself, I'm thinking itself becomes myself. Not true. Never will be, never can be. The harder I work at self-help, the more I'm trying to fix a self that is basically an illusion in thought, an image in thought, believed to be true, believed to be reality. So my whole version of reality is a perversion of reality. It's backward, it's abnormal, it's unhealthy, it's unnatural. And if the basis of our existence is in fact something that doesn't change, while the universe seems to constantly be changing. It's interesting that philosophers way back when realized that if everything is always changing, the one thing that isn't changing is that everything is changing. So when I look at things in the grandest way, meaning everything rather than some things, if I look at some things, it seems that some things are always changing. I can't keep them still. Of course, I can't keep them still if they're always changing. My life becomes difficult if I think I'm trying to control them and stop them from changing when they're in the midst of everything that's changing. So if the basis of existence is not changing, if it's absolute, which has been talked about through history, poets and philosophers and seers and gurus and maharajis and all kinds of religious prophets, etc., have talked about this infinite source. There's something infinite. It doesn't have exceptions. It doesn't have parts and pieces. It doesn't come apart and it doesn't come together because it's simply a present state of being. Wherever we are, it seems to be. And the only difference between knowing that and thinking it seems to be that is beginning to concede that it's that way regardless of what we think. Just to start to notice that if it exists, period. No more complicated than that. And if the basis then of my thinking is based on something that is absolutely still, meaning it doesn't move, it doesn't change, and yet it's still here within the context of time, stillness is still available, always in reach, always my present state of being that isn't mine and isn't yours, but it's actually ours because there is no division in it. It's indivisible, it's immutable, it's inviolable. And if that is the basis of human existence, and I would say it's the basis of the universe, which we feel like we're a small part of, but in fact, we feel that we're a small part of it because we think we're separate from it, because we think our thinking is real and true. We think we're disconnected from it. So those would all be, I would call, lies, ideas that are false, thought to be true. We don't have to think we're lying to be lying and cause the exact same anxiety that anyone who's trying to keep a secret witnesses when they're trying to avoid anyone finding out what they're trying to hide. That source of anxiety and fear and the threat of being found out. Why? Because we think we're in the thoughts, we're hiding, covered up. We call it ego, but ego actually is a word. Once again, we use ego incorrectly. Ego as a word is the capital I, meaning the source of I am. Thinking about myself is a good indication of a sentence where I'm defining I as the I am, the observer, thinking about myself as though I have a distinct, separate persona, characteristics built into this rational construct of who I think I am, as though it's separate from me. And why would that be if I weren't thinking in ways that thought I was separate from reality, separate from life, feeling alone, feeling like I'm never where I belong and need to always get somewhere else and have something else somewhere else that never seems to happen because that somewhere else when I'm there is always present. It's always the present state of being. And if I've manufactured a thought process that's I've been so addicted to, every time I get to that place, I will find it unfulfilling because all of my imagination that it would be the place would also include this idea that I still need to get somewhere else because I haven't simply conceded I'm already there, I've always been there, I can't be anywhere else.
Can I share
So,
something with you, Jack?
yeah, please, Harry.
Yeah, remember back in 2022 when all this happened to me?
Yes.
It just the scary. One of my biggest fear was the that my thoughts would become real. I think I shared that with you. That I was like going crazy.
Yeah.
That was one of my biggest fear because my thoughts would become real one day.
It's
And that
interesting, isn't it, though, Harry, that the
yes,
idea
and
that
then
we're maintaining
yes,
the thoughts is the idea that they're real, and you were afraid that they might become real.
I would be very I'd be very tense. Like someday I would just wake up and all my thoughts will be real.
Yeah.
And I would just and just I think just I just gave it time and then I started to understand. And another thing, last night I had a not an argument but with someone, and I just couldn't stop thinking about that argument. And then I started to become very anxious again.
Angry?
But then, and then my mind just wanted to go back to that same. I just couldn't stop thinking.
Right.
I just wanted to go back and fix it. I just wanted to go back, and then I started to realize, oh, here we go again. It became a loop. I just couldn't stop it.
Right.
But the moment that I actually that I actually realized what was going on again. It's like I need to remind myself what's going on.
Yeah.
I need to see the patterns. And I was like, oh, this is happening again. Okay, then I need to take charge because if I don't stop this, not stop it, but if I don't realize what I'm doing again, I would just I'd be in my thoughts. I'd be in my mind again.
Well, you'd think you were.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So a couple of things to mention, Harry. We tend to think about stopping it because we've been so irresponsible about the fact that we've been the ones starting it. We've been thinking it's just something that happens that we have no control over because we have nothing to do with it. And in fact, we are the ones starting. It wouldn't start if we didn't start it. My brain doesn't just operate on its own and have all these ideas that sort of like it has a life of its own. But if you think of that concept, just like you talked about your thoughts becoming real, I have to think that my brain and my thoughts have a reality that I don't have for them to be doing things to me that I have nothing to do with. Right.
Yes.
So, one of the points, like when we originally spoke years ago, you were very much in the idea that those thoughts were real and they were haunting you and they were chasing you and they were attacking you and you had no way out. Because I remember, I think you were at 4th and Santa Monica or 4th, you were somewhere near the bus stop.
Yes, I was actually right outside the ER. I was just
Yeah.
ready to go in there because I just didn't know what to do.
Yeah. Well, so the thing you just mentioned, if we have an experience of beginning to actually notice what we're doing, and one of the ways we can do that is by talking about it, having the perspective of somebody else also saying, yeah, I can do that same thing too. Because our nature, our bodies are built on almost identical platform. The only variations for the most part are some traits and appearance, size, shape, color. Primarily,
That's
our
right. Yes.
DNA is the same.
Yes, you're right. It's just funny that I actually thought about it this morning.
Yeah.
And it's not the first time that I had an argument, but the other day too. But it's just you just said it the right way. It's like I actually decided to be like this because a few weeks ago same thing happened and I just didn't it wasn't the same like this. It's just that I choose to be like this. Like I
Well,
actually started. I
it's
actually
it sounds to me though that the circumstance, I used to think I didn't care. So I would say, who cares? Who gives a shit? All that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And what I realize is that I actually care so much, I don't always know what to do with the amount of care that I have. So when I do things that really interrupt my relationships, I'd really like to correct those things. But the
That's it.
misperception of the correction is thinking I have to go backward in time, which is impossible,
Yes,
to go back to a place that doesn't exist, to a circumstance that's over, and fix it
yes,
rather than see that that thought is causing the anxiety because I know better than to think I'm anywhere other than where I am with what I have. And if what I
that's
have is some doubt about something, I can always return to that person and say, look, I overreacted. I said things that I obviously meant at the time, but they were kind of sick thoughts that I had that I was expressing.
yes, you're right. It's just me trying to go back in time. It's just too much window. It's just
Yeah, well,
too
think about it. We're trying to
I
make
know.
believe that in all of time and space, the entire universe, we're going to reverse it for a minute and fix something in a place that doesn't exist.
I know you're right. I've been doing that for years. And then in 2022, in 2022, it's funny. In 2022, it actually came out. It's like my brain didn't want to be like this anymore, or myself didn't, or I didn't want to be like this anymore. And it's just, if you, I've been thinking about it quite a bit. And since I was a kid, I was like that. It's just me, something that I didn't like, and
Yeah.
I would just go back. My mind, I would just go back in time, which was just too much for my brain to handle. It was just too. I would just be very stressed out about going back all the time, all the time. It was just too much. That creates a lot of stress, anxiety, and then depression.
So think about the idea of going back in time when it can't be done, and you saying, my mind didn't, you're basically saying my mind didn't know what to do with it. Why? Because it's insane to think that there's a time to go back to when the whole essence of time is always where we are. And I would say we're not even in time. If time is always new, there is no end. So there's no time continuum in the present. So we're actually in that infinite now, in that infinite absolute present state, thinking thoughts that are insane and thinking that the insane thought's going to fix the thinking that's already insane from trying to do something that the brain can't do. And it's
Right.
maddening. It's literally maddening. And we wouldn't do it and be mad if we didn't know better. Literally. If that was all we could
Yeah.
do, it would feel normal. And we're really admitting, like you're admitting in the words you're using, your brain goes crazy when you ask it to do crazy things.
Yeah, you're right. And then I remember one time talking to you on my way back to my apartment in Santa Monica, and I was always in my mind. And then on my way back to my apartment, and I remember I said that to you. Everything, I see everything differently. It's like I see colors. It's like it's like I know it's funny. It's like I actually kind of remember what I told you. Everything looks so real. I said to you, but it's
Yeah.
actually I was actually in the moment. That's why I was not used to that. I was not used to being here. I was always in my mind.
Think of some of the words we use to talk about that state as cloudy and gray. I feel cloudy and gray. People use those words to talk about sort of being moody and being depressed and being
Mm.
sad and being morose and being, forgetting the word, but it's melancholy. Just sort of a state that seems to be ever present where everything just doesn't look as bright as it normally would and kind of dim. And the idea that you don't know better would have you not think about that at all. And the fact that you think about it is an indication that you know something's wrong. And you wouldn't know something's wrong if you didn't know better. So, one of the things I want to suggest to you as you're thinking about that is you can always think you're detached and you're gray and you're gloomy. You can think that that's who you are, and or you could think that those are thoughts you're having. And by having those thoughts that are gray and gloomy, you're going to manifest an experience that seems gray and gloomy. So your eyes, through that level of understanding, now are looking through a lens of, it's exactly what Alice in Wonderland was about, that story. She was looking through the looking glass. And understanding for humans is that looking glass. I see things visibly, but how I see them is affected by what I believe I'm seeing or what I'm thinking I'm seeing. So my understanding of them, as you're talking about getting some perspective on this, you're actually by having repeat performances of seeing the same thing come up when circumstances go where you might not like them to go or hope they didn't go or wish they hadn't gone, you start seeing that when the bounds of your thinking get overwhelmed, there's definitely a feeling of, I don't know what to do with this. Why? We're exceeding the comfort zone we've created and the limits that we've been enforcing as though that we had control over them, when in fact they were insane to think we were controlling it all. So
Mm-hmm.
talking about it gives us perspective. So I say, I watch myself, my experience that I call myself at times, all day long, doing this. It's like a ripple. It's like sitting on the ocean and trying to keep the boat still all the time rather than saying, oh, I'm on the ocean. Of course, the boat's moving up and down. Maybe there's calm seas for a while, but to some degree, there's going to be motion. And emotion is basically that motion. We're feeling that in our experience. We're feeling what we're thinking, but we're also emoting the sum total of everything that we know, not just what we're thinking. There's a sensory perception that we have that goes well beyond our thinking, which is why our body runs so smoothly without us thinking about it until it hurts.
Mm-hmm.
It's doing trillions of things right now chemically in terms of interactions. We don't think about it until it hurts. So that frustration, the maddening thing, is telling us there's something here to pay attention to. If you're interested, I'm going to give you information that something's wrong. If you want to look at it, you might want to admit something's wrong in your thinking, not me personally, not me as a being, not me as and I say personally because the persona that I'm projecting, the human persona I'm projecting, is all about what I'm trying to project I am based on what I think, rather than let people see what they want and realize they're going to think what they want anyhow about what I'm doing. I don't have any control over what they think. I can think I do because I can think I'm in my thoughts, and now my mastery has to be controlling other people's thoughts and how they think of me.
You're right. And you also mentioned about ego. It's like, I've been like, it's like sometimes I think I'm always right. Like,
You're always right.
yeah, yeah. Sometimes I think in my mind, I know I'm
Yeah.
not, I know that's not right. I know I know it's just my ego. It's just telling me, oh, or you're wrong. I'm right. It's like, and then once I do that, I start sweating. I feel tense. My breathing changes,
Yeah.
and it's just I'm actually starting to see all these things. And I know. You said I'm actually starting to notice that
Well,
I'm not doing the right, or maybe I'm not just not doing
no,
the
no, no.
right thing.
If you were to add 2 + 3 and say it's 4, you could do that, right?
Yes.
And you could also know that 2 + 2 is 4 and not 2 + 3 is 4, but you could keep doing that if you wanted. The problem is when we believe that the thinking we're doing that's false is true, we immediately begin to fight for the rightness of it obsessively. This is what obsessive thinking is. Obsessive thinking effectively is ego, in the sense that it's trying to project an image of self rather than notice that the actual self, the capital S, not the baby S, is in perfect order. It's the observer. It's the one looking at the thinking that's going on, observing the sensations that are happening. The one with the wisdom to recognize, oh, my body's telling me I'm using. It's like being in a cockpit of an airplane and the dashboard starts screaming and the pilot says, nothing's wrong. Don't worry about it. We haven't crashed yet. Don't worry. And
Mm-hmm.
we operate like that as humans by making believe that wrong, that rightness. See, and it's brilliant that you're seeing these things, Harry, so clearly in your words. I would suggest are intuitive and wise because you're starting to actually notice when we give way at all to the fact that truth is true. All of a sudden, we start seeing things with an ability of clarity that becomes so abundant and so full of greatness. That wisdom that comes out of it is enormous because we're starting to actually see our nature, not something that's exceptional and not something that's rare. It's only rare because we've been dumbing down and numbing our experience and desensitizing our experience by making believe that we should be feeling better about the wrong and trying to get over it rather than say, wait a minute, that wrong is actually telling me exactly what I'm thinking that's wrong. If I can
Mm-hmm.
simply have a relationship with it and say, thanks, wow, this is great information. I know now that I'm on a path that I can continue as long as I want, but I know it's the wrong path. Why? Because it has no basis in reality. It's just a thought imagined to be true. So if reality is reality, it's a very common fact in science that there is no more or less energy in our universe. So this is interesting. If there's no more or less energy, then there's a fixed state of matter, fixed state of energy. Matter is basically what they call frozen energy, like a log when it burns releases the heat. But the heat doesn't leave the universe, it just transforms into other things. And if that's going on all the time, we are part of that process of transforming those things. That's what we're doing. We're transforming and we're manifesting effects, and that's what our thoughts are actually doing.
Mm-hmm.
I lost a little of that thread right now because I almost went off on a tangent. But the point is, if I can get back to where I am, the clarity
where you are.
Exactly. Even, it's very convenient to use those terms to justify that sense of absence. But that desensitization and that polarization of thinking that one way can be true while the other is false is the source of anxiety and stress. And anxiety and stress undermines every one of our physical systems, bodily systems, metabolic and parasympathetic and nervous system, and all of them. So it undermines them all. It actually causes a physical threat that we're feeling. The fear we're feeling is actually recognizing that if we continue down this path, the stress and pressure we're creating will kill us sooner than later. And we're all going to go to that experience of death. There's no reason it has to be sooner, except the reasons we make up to believe we're in control and cause the problems that undermine our existence and threaten our survival by maintaining that thought that's wrong and thinking it's right. That's the core of obsessive thinking. And the core of obsessive thinking is thinking a lie can someday be true. Now, think about your thoughts when you thought, how the fear came when you thought your thoughts may become true. You were actually afraid of it. That's your body saying to you, there's something to fear here in what you're thinking. Mm-hmm. So to start seeing our feelings, I was talking about feelings and emotions, to start seeing our feelings as not emotions all the time. They're often just simply feeling what we're thinking. Is there a threat here? Am I being exposed? My senses are constantly feeding me raw data about my environment, constantly, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As long as I exist, I'm getting that information. It's what I do with it in my thinking that determines how I act in relation to it. If I see a bear like it's a cat, there's a good chance I'm going to get killed by the bear. If I see a bear as a bear, I might start thinking in ways that would allow me to escape its potential threat. But to think I need to feel better about threats that I'm creating in my own experience is to create a chronic condition that seems to be saving me, while really what I'm doing is numbing my experience. And we're sentient beings now being dumbed down and numbed, desensitized to what's happening. And that clarity you talked about in terms of seeing color clearly, when the stress isn't there, the eyes start doing what they're designed to do, which is to see colors and to see the visibility of distinctions and objects and visual articulations. If we didn't see those things, you wouldn't see an oncoming car. You wouldn't know that you're at the edge of a cliff. Those things are all guidance systems for our success as a species. And I don't suspect we're designed only to survive, but we're designed to thrive. To go beyond survival is just bare need. Food, shelter, clothing, and the least. But we're designed to thrive, meaning to come to solutions and come to a level of operating where everybody benefits. And we start thinking collectively about things we can do that will serve every future generation in terms of their potential to survive, rather than threaten them. So the clarity is brilliant. Now, I would suggest to you, Harry, as I've talked about here, and I don't know that this ever takes a lot of traction, or gets a lot of traction, but if the knowing nature of an absolute knowing nature is the knowing of nature, and it's our nature, then we must know. Les and I had to talk about this on Friday. We must know more than we think. And to act as though we don't know is to once again make believe that all we know is what we think. When in fact, if we have a greater knowing, how would my body be working in all the ways it's working right now if I didn't have a greater sense of knowing that I wasn't even thinking about? Even our bodies are sort of metaphoric, if not absolutely metaphoric, for this concept that may not be a concept at all. It may just be the actual state of being, the actual state of our state, the actual nature of our nature. And to begin to see that is to begin to see that that body language is actually telling us about our environment And because it feels uncomfortable to face uncomfortable things, and we've been trying to get away from the discomfort by trying to feel better, we've been creating a feedback loop of the brain saying, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. You're not paying attention. So I'm just going to repeat the message. And my experience with people is that they've had a chronic sense of something wrong their whole life, most of their life, and they've been right about that wrong. And yet thinking that the job of humanity, I did this, was to numb it down, deny it, pretend it wasn't there. Denial's psychic anesthesia. And it might last a moment where it feels better, but the long-term pain and misery is guaranteed. Just like 2 + 3 is 4 is guaranteed to be wrong, no matter how many times you repeat it, no matter how many people you convince of it. The machine of our brain is like a computer. If you put information into it that's garbage, you're going to get garbage out of it. And to think the garbage won't smell because you ignore it is to have it build up and build up and build up and build up. And what does trash do? It actually builds gases. What do? Explode on people, get pissed at times because some little thing triggers us. And that charge we've been maintaining gets unleashed on somebody else because we haven't been acting responsible. So we're pretty sure it's everybody and everything else doing it. And it seems to make sense within the confines of that thinking. But if the absolute nature of nature is at perfect peace, there is no conflict in that nature at all. There is no fight. There is no struggle. There is no depression. There is no anxiety. There is no insanity. There isn't actually any sanity either. Sanity is a function of humanity and mentality. A being that knows everything doesn't think. What would there be to think about if it knows everything? It isn't a process, it's just a state of ever-present pure consciousness. So we can all use all the words we want, but my primary point there is if you didn't know this, and Les didn't know this, and Jimmy, who was here a minute ago and we lost him, didn't know this, if we didn't have that as a basis, we'd never understand it. It would never become clear in any sense. Because it would be impossible to build the rational, reasonable. If we can barely survive on a daily basis with the limited amount of issues we have, how possible would it be for us to develop a rational brain sufficient to encompass all the variations of the universe and make believe that we're in charge? It'd be impossible. We can barely pay our bills in many cases. And society today is struggling financially. You're seeing this lack of productivity and the promotion of irresponsibility with people, saying the worse you get, the more we're going to give you. Doesn't help people maintain health. Productivity tends to be one of the sources of people feeling if you do something that's aligned with reality, it's going to produce a productive result every time. If you do something that's malaligned, not aligned with reality, it's always going to create a drag the longer we have that anchor dragging behind the boat. And we're choosing it. We're actually choosing it. The point of all that was you have it, you know it, we know it, everyone else knows it. Even the people you think you hurt, the people you think you need to correct, they know too. You know, one of my wife's, a woman that she deals with, has a lot of people come to her and talk about their childhood and all that stuff. And she calls it the love language of childhood. Like, what was your parents' love language? And it's an interesting concept because if an ever-present state of being doesn't have any conflict in it, and it's always generous, it always gives everything that it has, that would be pretty loving. But it doesn't mean we can't dysfunction and we can't act irresponsibly to the degree that we're maintaining ideas that aren't true as our seeming reality. And so we do sick things, not because we are sick, but because we're thinking thoughts that are sick. And those thoughts don't really exist anywhere other than in our thinking. Lies do not happen in the universe. They're only between the ears of people maintaining them. And they affect everything because anything I do that depreciates my capacity is pulling the same anchor that I might have in my own experience, I'm creating for society. In some way, I'm affecting everyone. So I'm either getting better or I'm getting worse. Doesn't tend to be in the center. And yet that being, that's in my humanity. In the being nature, it's always centered. There is no edge. There is no end. There is no, it's always beginning. It's always all possible. Everything that's available is always available. If that's our nature, and that concession is made, whether we understand it or believe it or have faith in it, because something that exists in reality doesn't need faith or belief at all. Yet if we have momentary consideration where we just begin to realize if it is true, it's simply true. Doesn't need my belief. I don't need to do anything about it. If I had to do something about it, I would be more powerful than it. My thinking would be the power because I could block it. I can't block it. I can think I can block it. I can feel separate. I can feel alone. I can feel disconnected because I'm thinking thoughts that are disconnected, and what I'm feeling are my thinking, not reality, not truth. Thinking that has no basis in reality. So I feel alone. Why? There's no place for that thought. So what do I feel? I got to get somewhere else with someone else or something else or more or less of something else. Always somewhere else, never here, never now. And yet I'm always here. I'm always where I'm always where I am with all that I have, as are all people in all things. So if that's our nature, and we're talking in unnatural, unhealthy, uncomfortable ways about those things as though we're going to fix those unnatural things, all we're doing is feeding and feeding and feeding and feeding the thought that someday our thoughts are going to come true. And we are afraid of that because we're actually dismissing reality as being real and making believe it's up to us. There's no greater terror, I suspect, that we can face than making believe it's up to each of us to come to terms with something that we already have. The impossibility of it is horrifying. And I don't expect there's any greater tragedy or trauma that we face than that present state of thinking. Imagining there's no place for us in the universe when in fact it's the thoughts we're claiming to be who we are that we're feeling. And to start noticing that is to start to actually laugh at what seems to be taken so seriously as to be thought of as who we actually are. It becomes a joke because this is just an imposter. It's like a clown act. Harry, a month or so ago, you talked about thinking about hiding things under your rug. I think they were thoughts you were talking about, putting them under the rug.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's what I used to do. But then, all this happened when everything came out in 2022. Like all my fears actually came out.
Yeah.
And then I started to think that they will someday become real. And that would just create a lot of panic attacks and then just a lot of fear. I couldn't breathe. I just I would just go for a drive, come back, try to go to sleep, and it was just insane to think that my thought would become real.
Well, but it's interesting that even in that thinking, you're looking for ways to put those thoughts somewhere other than where they are, thinking you could hide them under the rug and that you'd be better off. It's a great metaphor for the idea that in our own experience, the thing that maintains these thoughts is the thought that I'm not doing it, the thought that it's happening to me, the thought that there's nothing I can do about it is the root of addiction. So what do I think? If I don't have anything to do with it and it's happening to me, there's nothing I can do about it. So I might as well continue doing the same thing I've been doing, hoping someday it'll get better. And that hope drives me mad because I know better right now that there's no hope in it whatsoever. It's a hopeless idea that I have hope in. There's no amount of hope that's going to overcome that lie, ever.
I look at it very interesting. If that's physical idea that I'm going to put a thought or put these thoughts under the rug. What that literally says, thoughts are real and physical, and therefore I'm going to put that thought someplace because I don't think it's a good thought. I'm going to hide it or cover it up. That already concedes the fallacy, the premise that my thoughts are reality.
That's brilliant. Yes, you're giving it credit. That's very, very good insight.
I'm giving it a physical, literally a physical essence. In other words, I'm describing it, Harry, you're describing it in such a term, like something that was a physical object that you could touch, hold, see, or smell, and you were going to put it away or cover it up, as if, and therefore you gave it a physical presence, which made it literally not only real between our ears, but in the physical touching, seeing sense.
So now that would be an immoral story in our discussion, because what I've done is created a narrative to take this idea that my thoughts are real and put it in a place as though they're real enough to place somewhere, as though they have a place they belong, but still I want to cover them up, which is brilliant, Les. I mean, that's a very, very clear getting of the idea that I must think they're real to think I can hide them. So now think the whole time I'm thinking that idea that they're under the carpet and the whole concept of that is simply an image in my thinking.
To me, it's like halfway there. What do I mean by halfway there? You started this out by discussing that some people will take and believe that their thoughts are real to the point that are immoral, that they'll literally take their physical life, they'll commit suicide. So half of that, halfway there, is saying my thoughts have some form of physical reality, but at least I don't go all the way. I recognize this thought, if taken to an extreme, will either make me feel uncomfortable or end me. So I'm going to hide that thought, put the thought someplace else. So at least that's the distinction I feel when you're talking about knowing, the intuitive knowing that always is, and our thinking that is off track, and as a result, it's not aligned or balanced with existence or survival.
Yes, it's unnatural. It's abnormal. It's actually diseased. But to that point, real quick, Harry, where do you think that carpet is in our psyche, Les?
I'm hoping it's in someone else's house.
Well, because one point to make here, too, is that I'm really not trying to talk about other people as much as I'm talking about my own experience, because it isn't until we each start noticing what we're each doing. I don't have any control over anybody's thoughts. I can think I do. I can say all sorts of things, and I may be able to influence what you do. It's every individual's decision that's creating their experience, and we're free to think, so it's everyone's right to do whatever they want with their thinking. And to see that is to not be offended by people, but to recognize that they're often on sick paths that are not helping. How do I help them if I'm as sick as they are, trying to complement their sickness by telling them I've come up with some new way to hide the thoughts under the rug? But that thing we're thinking about is our subconscious. We call it subconscious. We talk about the subconscious openly as a place that we have no idea what's going on. How convenient that we talk about it openly as subconscious, below our consciousness. Interesting when you think about the words understanding and substance. It's beneath our feet. It's the fundamental foundation of what we do know that we think we're hiding. We think keeping it in the dark means there's no light, to your point about seeing the colors brighter. When you start seeing things, all of a sudden that weight of darkness that we maintain and making believe that it's under the carpet, all of a sudden you wake up and say, oh, I have a sense of knowing that's much greater than I was imagining, when all I was thinking was that I needed to fix the thoughts I was thinking that were sick. To fix sick thoughts is to create new sick thoughts trying to fix the sick thoughts. It doesn't work like the hospital where they're actually dealing with something that's actually happening. This is all illusion being presumed to be real. And that idea we hide it is because we're embarrassed, in my experience.
Isn't
And
that
what's
the, I'm sorry, you've kind of flipped it on its head. You call that the reality or the essence or the knowing. We actually misdescribe it as unconscious or subconscious. I
yes.
thought it was Eckhart Tolle that described it just the opposite, that basically when we're having delusional thoughts, that's unconscious, that often we're going around in a state of unconsciousness because that doesn't make sense, whereas the all-knowing consciousness is always there.
But the difference is we think we're unconscious because we create the thought that the only way to save ourselves from the embarrassment of admitting we're doing it is to pretend we don't know what we're doing. That is all created in a conscious effort to deny and pretend the things under the rug. And I have nothing to do with it. Now think about this cycle. I have nothing to do with it. Secondly, there's nothing I can do about it now. Third, it's happening to me. So it certainly doesn't have anything to do with me. And so what am I left to do? The same thing over and over and over again, thinking someday it'll get better. I'm creating that and thinking it's subconscious, when in fact the consciousness is all part of the same consciousness. None of it is sub, none of it is above. It's an absolute state of being that doesn't have a subterranean aspect to it. It doesn't have a heaven and a hell. There is no distinction in it because it's absolute in its purest form. And to start thinking about the infinite as something that doesn't change is to start allowing our thoughts to notice that the observer that we are have always been witnessing what's going on honestly. We've just been subjecting ourselves to a clever ruse and being an imposter. Think of what's interesting about the word self-consciousness, if you look it up, it's defined as undue regard for appearance. Now, you would think if we really imbued the thinking about our thinking itself as a self, if we really created a consciousness that's separate from us, we would be God. We would be that concept of God. We're now the creators of reality, which now would be called ego. And yet, ego doesn't exist any more than a lie exists. So to think of it as something to fix and repair is to continue to give it the idea, like you're pointing out, Les, that we can hide it under the carpet. And what are we really hiding? Our embarrassment. When we take ourselves seriously, we're embarrassed about the self that we're taking, because it's now just what we think, and we know our thoughts are constantly changing, and we can't keep up with the criticism of our own experience because it isn't who we are and we know better. And we're in complete doubt and uncertainty about this self we keep projecting. And if you think about that self-conscious definition, undue regard for appearance, it means we're constantly projecting an opinion that we think is an appearance, but an appearance is an illusion. Appearance isn't reality, because reality always contains substance. The essence of forms always have substance. There's always an invisibility to that essence. And even within protons and neutrons and electrons, they're largely space. The amount of matter in it is less than a 0.0000000% of matter. It's almost all space. So the nothingness ultimately becomes the everythingness. And physicists today are starting to see that there's more matter in what we call space than there is in the matter that we call matter. So this thing that's between us is interconnecting us. The air, the distance, all those things do not separate us. And we're all functioning together as a seamless whole while we're acting as though we're apart and separate and disconnected. I sat with somebody yesterday and he was talking about those thoughts. And I said, give me the words you used with those thoughts. He went right down the list: disconnected, alone, separate. What could be more separate from reality than something that wasn't real thought to be real? There's no basis to it other than a thought. And if the thought is insane, there's no basis to the insanity other than the maintenance of the idea it's not insane, the maintenance of the idea that false can be true. That lie is the quintessential essence of addiction. Because once we start maintaining it, the experience becomes so consuming, so intoxicating, our bodily chemicals are released as though there's a real emergency because the body's taken our direction. It's not saying, look, I'm not going there. You've done this a million times. Because the body doesn't have an opinion. No, our senses don't have an opinion. They feed us raw data. The opinions are all generated in our thoughts. So this isn't about not thinking, it's about starting to see. And I hear this a lot from people when they start actually conceiving of the idea of not thinking obsessively, they'll often say, you're asking us not to think. I say, it's interesting that we would think not thinking obsessively means not thinking, but it indicates to me, what occurred to me, was that we've been thinking obsessively so long, we think that's what thinking is obsessive thinking, and it is not. That's a condition we create by the process that we impose and induce. The insanity is induced by the individual who's suffering it. Now, I'm not going off on a medical thing here and claiming that that's the source of all insanity, because I'm sure that there's genetic predispositions that have been passed down from bodies that have been trying to make sense of insanity for centuries and millennia that have dysfunctioned and are born in ways that can't seem to conceive or process reality. But to the degree that any of us are capable, we are certainly able to start noticing that we can always make things worse. And if we can make them worse, we can always be better, always. And if that is possible, even in the relative sense, it means that the fullness of possibility in this infinite sense gives us absolute freedom of every moment to choose whether we want to get worse or better, whether we want to grow or shrink. And that shrink-wrapped suffocation is very often what people are trying to manage and relieve themselves of while they're the ones creating the lack of oxygen. That thought has no that ego has no oxygen whatsoever. And the idea that we're suffocating, our posture gets bad, our breathing gets bad. We're the only species that needs breath work classes. We start breathing when we're born. We breathe every minute of the day, every day we've been born. We breathe multiple times, but we need to be taught to breathe. Why? Because our bodies are depressed. They're hunched over. They're not sitting with an upright sense of posture. Our lungs collapse. We can't take oxygen. That impairs the body's ability to function. Another way of undermining those bodily systems as a result of depression and anxiety and stress and pressure. So if we're inducing it, it might be worth admitting when we're experiencing it that somehow it's not me, it's the choices I'm making in my human experience that are causing this. And by starting to take that position, like you described, Harry, so beautifully, once you started seeing that, you started noticing things that you'd done and started realizing, oh, I don't have to do that. But there often remains this idea that we have to stop it rather than say, no, I'm the instigator of it. I'm starting it. I have no obligation to restart it right now, ever. I have no obligation whatsoever. So the sick idea that I can only do what I used to do means I'm in that addictive loop, just cycling and circulating and thinking I'm going to turn this thought into reality the longer I think about it, but I'm thinking about it with more contaminated thoughts because the thought that even imagines it can be real is still polluted with the same contaminant that started it. I think you said the other day, Les, you can't fix broken thinking with broken thinking. And we can think that and yet continue to do that because we've gotten so good at making believe we're not doing what we're doing that we think what's happening shouldn't be happening, rather than say, no, what's happening is actually telling me everything I need to know about what I'm doing. What's happening is that my circumstances, my situations, my relationships, the thoughts I'm having about people are all revealing how well I am in my thinking, how well my mental health is, or my mental disease. So we don't create reality, we simply manipulate our mentality. And to make believe that we're going to create reality and fix it someday is depressing because we create pressure by resisting what's actually happening and making believe we can win the battle. We become a wrestler, an identical wrestler, thinking we're going to go in and win the battle, win the fight. but the creator of it is the effect of it. The master of it is the slave to it. We are doing that circular, vicious cycle, creating it on our own terms, thinking someday it'll be real, someday I'll be saved, someday I'll be better. And as long as we maintain it, there seems to be no escape, because my sense is we don't talk about it openly enough to start talking about insanity as something that's largely induced rather than something that we're a victim of. We don't talk about that socially. And I would say if it's accurate, it's worth talking about.
What I think that does, it kind of reminds me of how one looks at the first step, the notion of, and it often happens with people that when we look at people and they're always the victim because they can't accept personal responsibility or have difficulty doing that. So whenever we say we want to put this thought under the rug, or it's something or someone else's fault, or then we're already the natural feeling, our understanding that this is not serving me or harmful to me or an ill feeling gives it a purportedly either a physical or other existence separate from me. Yet, so that I'm powerless, it's me, I can't do anything. When the truth is, or maybe the reality is, once we see that we, as you say, we are the ones that started, if I could come to a premise and accept responsibility, or that I have the decision-making power to think differently, act differently, be different, then I actually have the ability to not have insane thoughts, and or that the thoughts that I have aren't really reality. I've just created them, and I'm going to create different thoughts.
Well, let's go to the absolute and talk about it from that perspective, which isn't a perspective at all. It's just a state of being. If we know, then that's the knowing you're talking about trying to get to and thinking. So if we already know that knowledge, the anxiety is actually our body language saying to us, you're thinking something that's stressful. You're thinking something that has no place. You're trying to maintain this bridge in midair, but it has no structural integrity. It's going to collapse. So all of a sudden, the anxiety becomes a benefit because it's the curriculum, it's the education telling us I'm creating anxiety because what I'm talking about and thinking about has no basis in reality. So I can't ever bring it to fruition. I can't ever turn it into a productive result. I can never eat the food for thought that I'm eating that's contaminated, poisonous, and has no basis. It's not nourishing. So it's like imagining a meal and I'm starving and I think I'm eating the meal, and it may temporarily give me some sense of release, but it's not going to give me the nourishment my body is craving to survive. So if we know that knowing, and we can't not know it because we're of it, it can't be without us. It can't be within us because it's not spatially and dimensionally based. It's just an ever-present state of being, sort of like the air. We don't have to see it and understand it to know that when we take a breath, we're going to have some of it. It's very seldom in life that we go to take a deep breath and don't get a breath. If that knowing is knowing, that's what intuition is. It's what inspiration is. It's what wisdom is. Go, Harry.
I'm sorry. Unfortunately, I have to go, Jack. Thank you for having me as well. Thank you. Nice seeing you, Jack.
I'm very happy you came.
Nice seeing you.
Thanks for hanging with us.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Harry.
So if we know it less, and start simply considering this, because this isn't a belief thing. Because if you considered that 2 + 2 was 4, and you just sort of tried it out one day and found out that it worked, you'd probably use it again, right? If you were trying to create an inventory for a business or trying to satisfy a debt or something in terms of a human relationship, you'd probably start using it because it works. So consideration doesn't have to include belief or hope or faith or any of those things. To simply notice that consideration is a contemplative state if that knowingness is knowingness, it isn't in a process of constantly trying to decide things and come to a new conclusion that's right, like Harry was talking about. The only reason I ever fight for what's right is when I'm thinking something that's wrong. Because if life is already in perfect order and perfectly intact, I don't need to fight for it at all to have it. It's the fighting I'm doing in my thinking needs to get there that's causing the disillusionment and the disturbance and the unhealthy, abnormal consequences of making believe that that's my reality. That's my only reality. I'm stuck in this. And humans, my expectation, given that we think war is a necessity, doesn't seem to be a necessity for any other species than ours. It's interesting that we would think that, and in all the evidence around us, not see that happening, and yet think that we must be at war and need to be at war, that somehow there's some conquering ability. It's the same reflection, the same metaphoric idea that I'm going to conquer that thought. I'm going to hide it under the covers and make believe I'm not having it so I can be better, while I'm in fact denying what I'm doing to make believe. So I'm a liar making believe I'm going to be real. I'm going to be true. I'm going to be honest. It's very deceptive, but it's a creative connivance for sure. It certainly shows that we have an enormous ability to make believe that belief is reality. And yet, often when we see things that we find unexpected, we say, wow, that's unbelievable. We've witnessed them and then say it's unbelievable simultaneously. Sort of shows the fallacy of belief. Not to say we shouldn't have belief, we can't have belief, but that's a construct of reason. It's a construct of thought. It's not a construct of being. And my expectation, and I know that this is sort of heretical, but I don't think it's any different than when people thought the universe was at the center of the world was at the center of the universe, and Copernicus started saying, no, it's not. And people who thought that was true to support their contention were threatened. But my sense is we've been praying to ego the whole time because we think of God just like a human. God listens or doesn't listen. He gives or doesn't give. It's a he. It's not a she, it's a he. We've got it defined as a human. It's in heaven. It's not here. We talk about in the Lord's prayers, on earth as in heaven. But don't think of that as something that's actually possible, but something we need to wait to get to someday. We got to die to get there. And the ultimate death is beginning to realize this self that we've called ourself has no life whatsoever at all. It's a delusion. It's an illusion being thought of as reality. And so we've been working hard to perfect it and to make it right and to make it seem real and do all those things, those manifestations you were talking about, Les. The ability we have to manifest effects in our body is the ability we have to manipulate the feelings we're having.
That's like, I got to say, this whole thing kind of senses the old joke in a relationship. Would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? Well, if happiness is a state of being, if this notion of trying to be right, delusional thinking, thinking that I'm right, but I have to let go of it if I want to have emotional comfort or coexistence.
Well, my sense is the absolute state of being isn't happy. It's just perfectly content. And why? Because it's the content of reality. When we feel discontent, what is that? No content. It's a very good word for the idea that we're thinking thoughts that have no substance as reality. What's the substance? The things we can't see. We don't see gravity, but we rely on it constantly. We don't doubt it. We get up every morning and put our feet on the ground and never think, I wonder if I'm going to be held to the earth today.
Yeah, but if you start from the problem that most people have obsessive thinking or given abnormal, inappropriate value or construct to thinking or ego, it makes you either fearful or unhappy or disturbed or distressed, one would like to think that there is a opposite positive emotion. To say that, geez, I feel depressed or I feel fearful, I just think I'd rather like to go to the natural state of contentness, doesn't seem like something that's really something to aspire to when one's trying to let go of those other feelings.
Yes, because with being stuck in the thinking, you think the opposite of the thinking is your goal, when the opposites are always combined. They're always shared. Good and bad are the same thing. They're just different extremes. And to think that we can to think that this pendulum of change that's always occurring, these mood swings, we're just going to keep it on the happy side all the time, is a very depressing approach to living, because it's never going to stay there. It's always going to swing back. It's always going to go through its process as we go through the process. So in a natural state of being, you know what the opposite of the absolute is?
Nothingness.
Absolute. Stays the same because there's no difference in it. So the similarities that we think of always are the same. And what are we told when we come into the program? Look for the similarities, not the differences. Why? Because that's the connective tissue of reality. The baseline of knowing, if we all know it, is the base of our actual existence. It isn't something we're separate from, but we can think we are. And to fix the thinking from within the thinking is always going to think of the opposite extremes as being the thing to get to, rather than notice that peace isn't happy or sad. What's the book say? Neutrality. We're taken to a place of neutrality as though it happens to us, for us, not by us. Tells us that. What's neutrality? Dead center of those two things. It's the real center. And it took till Stephen Hawking said, in an infinite universe, everything and everyone is at the center. Think of the difference in that compared to the idea of self-centered thinking. When I'm thinking I'm in the center, I'm thinking no one else is at the center simultaneously. So now I'm the guy and no one else is the guy or the girl. That's a tough load to bear when there's 8.5 billion people out there. But what Stephen Hawking said, if everything's at the center, what is that? Unity. A combined essence that's something that is absolute rather than relative. And another thing to think about, Les, is that it's easy to have ideas about all other people and be confident in our opinion. But it's interesting that we can have ideas about everyone else and be confident in what we think about them while we're still struggling with doubt in our own experience. And I would say that's simply a projection trying to give us some credit for the discredit that we're maintaining in our own experience and the ideas that we're thinking we're not thinking, and all of the sort of dysfunctional tendencies that have habitually and chronically and addictively become part of who we think we are, that the presence of those, when seen, dissipate as quickly as we're willing to look at them honestly, as they are, rather than as we think they are and as we think they should be and as they might be and we hope for, and all that other wishful thinking that we do about trying to finally get it right. So to that point, my sense is responsibility is absolute. It's not something we give and take. Irresponsibility is a choice of humans, like the idea that we have an ego is a choice of humans. It's not in reality. It's simply something brains are capable of producing. The idea, which is an illusion. Ideas are basically imagery. And the idea of the thoughts being under the rug is another extension of that imagery, as you pointed out so well. That idea of thinking it's real, that we can actually put it somewhere, as though it has anywhere to be, other than in the thinking we're doing right now about the thinking that we're doing. It's never any further than where we are, because there is no other place, there is nothing else happening than the present state of where we are now, always. It's always been that way. And Harry said very beautifully, when he starts thinking about going back to that place, he started becoming afraid. And he started becoming afraid that those thoughts he had would become reality, because he knew that for them to become reality, there would be no other reality. And he would then have madness as his only reality, and insanity. Trying to kill one's body to stop the thinking, because we become so accustomed to making believe that that obsessive thinking is natural and normal, is missing the fact that it's unnatural and abnormal. And to talk about it is to give people a chance to take a breath and say, wait a minute, maybe shooting myself in the head and leaving my kids behind and my family behind and everyone wondering what happened isn't the best next step. Maybe it's not the only thing I can do. Exactly what happens to somebody using alcohol, drugs, etc., when they finally say, maybe This has been the source of the problem. And you were pointing to the first step. The first step in the mental obsessive aspect is seeing that the alcohol was not the problem. It wasn't that we were powerless over alcohol. We were powerless over the idea that we could control and enjoy it, that we could do it like other people did it that didn't have the allergy like we do, the metabolic inability to process sugar. That's the allergy. When we see that, we're really looking at the thought and saying, I can't control it, and I don't enjoy it. And as Richard says, when I enjoyed it, I didn't control it. When I controlled it, I didn't enjoy it. So you see how the opposites sort of work. If there's an opposite, it's within thinking, it's within rationale, it's within understanding. If it's absolute, it's the same. There is no opposite. Thinking in those terms, just considering it, as preposterous as it can be to the rationale we've developed, begins to relieve thinking, because we're no longer asking it to do the insane thing that's impossible. And the relief is actually palpable. Contentedness actually becomes a very desirable state because there's no impulse in it. There's no urge to do something that we have to do. There's none of that prodding from behind the scenes that seems to keep us in constant motion, trying to get somewhere we never seem to arrive. It's just a perfect state of peace. And my experience is that the greatness of our fullness is the great fullness we see when we start experiencing that, because it stops becoming what we have and don't have and what we think we need to get there, and all that other stuff just dissipates. Doesn't mean I can't recreate it when circumstances seem to be a little beyond the control I think I need to get the things I think I want. But I start functioning at a level that's much more productive and much more engaging and much more inclusive in creating those goals, and realizing that those goals are never going to happen by me doing anything alone. They're going to happen by me participating with everyone and giving everybody an opportunity to participate in some way that's constructive, rather than in the way I think they should do it. And the only way that's going to be done is how I think and demand and insist. And start to actually work and say, if everybody's got this nature, and my dad used to say he was a captain in the Marines. He said they taught him to tell a man what to do, not how to do it. Interesting. The only fact was, what's the result? Get the result's what we're after. In human endeavor, the productivity of survival is based on our ability to engage with our environment. And if the environment we're creating is insane, we're not going to engage well at all with that environment. We're going to maintain a level of desperation because we know something's wrong. We're aware that something's wrong. All of those byproducts, which we broached a little bit the other day, all of those feelings are body language that seem hard to deal with because they're uncomfortable. And if we're running from the feeling, we're running from the information that feeling is telling us, that's giving us perfect guidance as to what we're doing in our thinking, not who we are as beings, not who we are in our essence. It's just telling us about our thinking. And it becomes right-sized because now we're thinking about thinking as thinking rather than thinking about thinking as reality. Think of the grandiosity in that, the pomposity, the absurdity. And as Jim Carrey said it, that he gave a talk at an Ayurveda, he had an incredible spiritual experience as a result of having gotten so into one of the characters he played that when he was done with the movie, he said, "Who am I now?" He started to realize that all the things he thought he was all of a sudden vanished because he'd gotten completely into the character that he'd played. But he said at this college, I think it's online somewhere, and it's a brilliant talk, but he said the ego only promises to give us what we already have. Interesting that we would rely on it to get there, when in fact, if we're already there, we also have to be denying we're there right now. And that's the insane urge. That's the impulsiveness, the reactiveness, the impulsiveness, the compulsiveness of addiction.
I was thinking of how you presented it, like you're saying, oh, if I see something that someone else is either doing or thinking and it's not correct, what I'm really doing is potentially seeing something within myself. But that's, to me, that's the egotistical way of somehow thinking that I'm right and what they're doing is wrong. And so clearly I'm superior or more connected or understanding because I can see their lack of whatever.
Brilliant.
while
Brilliant.
they go through that.
Yeah, you're on the high road and they're on the low road. We're all even, but you happen to be on the high road.
I'm on the low road, and life isn't worth living because I see how it's going on and I just can't seem to get out of it. Now it's the other side. Oh, you poor things! I wish you understood the world the way I did.
It's brilliant, Les. I mean, that my experience has been that I'm being given perspective to the degree that I deny what I'm experiencing in my own experience, which I'm very good at. Denying and pretending I'm not doing what I'm doing and then be caught off guard. We even say that I'm caught off guard. Why? Because I'm normally on guard. What happened? My circumstances exceeded the bounds of what I thought I was guarding. But to start seeing what people are giving me is the same thing that my feelings are giving me. But as long as I resist the feelings, I start seeing it in other people because I'm unwilling to admit that the responsibility I have is that I'm acting irresponsibly. So what do? I assign it to them. So now what I've learned is I break off relationships or apart from people with either fuck you or I love you. And the degree to which that occurs is based on whether I think what they're doing is causing my problem to become obvious, or what they're doing is giving me the perspective to start seeing what I'm seeing in them is what I'm doing, and realize at the same time, sadly, that I've never seen them at all for anything other than what I thought of them, not who they were. I didn't give them the credit for having the knowing nature that they have. I gave them discredit for the same discredit I was trying to take for doing what I was doing and blaming them for having it happen. And that's a very subtle form, but if you see the distinction there and the sickness in that, it's easy to imagine societies built on that line of thinking would certainly erupt in a roar that would be violent and hateful and spiteful and contemptful. And it's a pretty good example of human history. We've researched the stars. We're starting to look at the bottom of the ocean. The one thing we haven't looked closely at, in my experience, is how we think, mechanics of thinking in an absolute, honest way, so that we can start to see the nature of existence is spiritual. It's invisible. And yet, the fact that we can't see it, understanding is designed to see what we can't see visibly. That's what understanding is. If we can begin to concede it in the least, we begin to admit the knowing in our thinking and start to allow thinking to base our thinking begins to base its actions on that stability. And so the actions we take become helpful before we even notice it, because we're not thinking about it at all. We're simply acting on what we know. And that's a very rewarding experience, because as you know, you all of a sudden see you've done something that's kind of surprising in the midst of all the things that you're not surprised by, that sort of repetitive, demoralized state of incomprehensible application of thoughts that haven't worked, that we're all pretty used to. But when all of a sudden you see something work and you realize it had very little to do with you, but you were a conduit, it's a moment where gratefulness is automatic. It isn't something you need to do as a repetitive ritual to remind yourself that there's something to be grateful for. You're actually expressing the fullness of that greatness. And bam, the productivity is beautiful, and it's collective, and it's inclusive, and there's no division whatsoever. Nor has there ever been, but to the thinking we're doing. And if the thinking we're doing is insane, it has had no impact on reality whatsoever. Only our mentality and our thinking about reality has been impacted.
Yeah, I get it.
Love you, brother. I know you got it.
It's like, again, it's like there's this process, and I'm not saying it's correct or but so we'll start with those who are either so sad, so depressed, so fearful that physical existence and ceasing of existence might be the solution to the peace that they're seeking. And then we become evolved to the point where, whoa, that's not absolute, that's not correct. So now see the power of my properly directed thinking, I can see the fallacy or the weakness or the unnatural destructiveness of the way you're putting some power into these thoughts that are not true. And therefore, I am now powerful because I see the fallacy of your thinking as compared. So now I'm scratching my own ego because the thoughts that I have reality, but those aren't destructive thoughts because they allow me to be superior and alive as compared to, and that's just as much of a delusion. And that's
exactly.
like you say, that seeking happiness all the time, you're going to ultimately, since it's not a permanent state of being, you're going to happiness, depressed, how do I get back to happiness, whatever, as compared to contentment and peace. So, on the spectrum, I'll take the ego to the point where I feel sorry for those who are so depressed that they may consider taking their own lives. But that's still a far state from me being the natural state of contentment and unity with the rest of the world.
Well, in that vein, what I've come to realize is that whenever I see what I'm seeing in someone else, it's exactly what I'm doing. To the degree that...
to be honest, that is the best way to, I'm sorry, because one is sometimes sensitive or egotistical, when I can see something that we relate to, the similarities, often the similarities of how some the novel with this, it has an abnormal effect on every other aspect of their life. When I can relate to that, then I can see it in myself, and it often permits me to go, whoa, let me let that go of, because I see in you the discomfort or harm or unhappiness or stress or fear that it brings you. Yeah, first of all, I'm not alone. I'm not unique. That's always helpful, that, because I like to believe that sometimes my stupid thoughts are only me having these stupid thoughts. But second of all, it can actually provide inspiration, because the same thing that often says, that has people say that they're the victim because it's happening to them, that notion of that distinctness, of that sensation or that feeling of uselessness, harm, fear, whatever, if I can recognize the irrationality of it in someone else, then maybe I can see that and I can relate to it. That helps me deal with the irrationality within myself.
Well, I would say that you're only seeing it in them because you're irrational to begin with. You're really thinking it's them. If everybody has a knowing sense, and that knowing sense can't be unknown, to start seeing everybody that way, just conceding it, kind of like 2 + 2, just considering that, oh, they have that too, is to start accurately seeing them. And a lot of the things that I used to spend my time thinking about all of a sudden dissipate, because I realized that I've been using everybody to justify. I mean, think of this idea, Les, that we have to feel better, I have to be better than everyone else. Like, I'm constantly trying to make people worse so that I can feel better. That's a pretty sick approach to, there but for the grace of God go I, is that idea. I have the grace, but they're clearly not in God's grace because they crashed in an airplane and died. Well, airplanes crash. People do die. It isn't some inflicted state. It's part of the possibility of flying. It just happens. To think of me as better and saved is to think of God as flipping a lever, just like we do as humans, to create effects that we either like or don't like. Most of my experience is that I don't struggle with love at all, because there is no struggle in love. It's an absolute state of being. What I struggle with is what I like and don't like. And I think the difference between the two is love or hate, which it isn't. Because what I found was I love hating things when I hate them. I must love it to be doing something so despicable as to make believe that's the best thing I can do within the context of human love. Same thing with wanting things. If I have freedom to choose, I must always want what I'm choosing because I'm absolutely free to do what I'm doing. So to think that the results I create shouldn't be what I thought they should have been, when in fact they're exactly replicating the thought I had. If the thought was half-baked, I'm probably not going to get the thing I expected. So to not notice it's the thought that I'm actually struggling with is to think the circumstance is the problem that's causing me, rather than seeing that I make decisions that I think are right. And as a result, I think the only thing that should happen is what I thought would happen. These are all possibilities within the spectrum of the choices we have. And it doesn't make them right, and it doesn't make them real for us to believe in them and have faith in them and keep trying them. It makes it an addiction to our thinking. That's it. It's a loop and a loop and a loop that I'm not doing. I don't have anything to do with it. Everybody else must be doing it to me. Something else must be happening. Even if it's unseen, it's not everybody else. It's some other force, some mythical force. We've created stories through humanity that are fantasy acting as reality to help make this point.
It's the great delusion that we're not all connected, and that there isn't a unity, or that that we're all the center. Whether it's my thoughts are separate and not real, or whether you and I are different and not real. I get it, and the contentness is I don't know, maybe acceptance isn't the right word, but coming to the conclusion, if you want to put power in your thinking, that everything is the way it's supposed to be. I am half a block from home after 100 miles. I am grateful for both the physical, mental, and ultimately emotional journey you've led me on today, Jack. And I look forward to it.
You led us on. Thank you very much, Les. Welcome home.
Don't worry. I'll be back.
Love you, brother.
Love you too.